Okay. guess I'll be on the end. Since you gonna ask me questions last, right?
All right.
That's not fair, man. You just took a step.
Any assignment?
Wasn't even wherever you want to be.
Y'all are tripping with that one step.
That was man effortless. I had to like.
And Jonathan's was like not a quarter of a step.
No.
I was past 90 degrees.
No. I am 5'3". That's out.
Not on yet.
Testing. These are not on.
Test.
Like podcast stuff. I'm finna give you the whole.
You gotta hold it like an MC. Now you hold it all the way up there. Like an MC.
Testing.
Test. Okay.
Test.
Yeah, bro. We on TV now, man. Yeah, it's
Go through
perfect.
your do, re, mi,
Yeah,
fa.
hook us up.
Yeah.
If I can give you all a little bit of mic direction,
Please.
especially you three, yours work really well when they're about this way, far away from your mouth.
Okay.
Yours is much better
Okay.
for range.
You got the singer's mic.
Apparently, although I do not carry any
Away
tunes.
from the mic, it actually turns the sound way down too.
So, this is okay.
Directional mic.
If you can hold it, that's usually the best way.
I'm gonna try to go like this.
Let's say, if you'll show me how to.
So you saying?
No, this is. I think it's all right, right?
Point it so it's, if you're going to leave it on there, point it so it's facing you.
Point it toward a little more toward your
Let me move it here. Let me move this Put it kinda in front of me.
Yo,
We can move it this way some too. Yeah, like that. Okay.
I've done
All
a
right, that
podcast
works.
too. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Philip, I heard Philip gonna sing.
Hey,
we do have a live stream audience.
Okay.
That's why the microphones are critical.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
How about this? Is this
Yes,
okay?
and we will.
If you can turn it, just pivot a little bit towards you.
Like this?
The head of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Hook me up. You know.
got it.
Okay, like this.
You actually, let's go a little closer.
Yeah. I'll let you put it where it needs to be because I'll have.
Back over this.
All right, I won't move it. How you doing, Lauren? Good. You too. I know.
okay.
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 Sounds great.
Glad to be here.
Have your intros. Hopefully they're correct. We're going to see.
Whatever you got should work.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.
I do want to get a picture.
Welcome back. I hope you had a hearty lunch break. My name is Dr. Oluwatomisin Olayinka Oredane, and welcome back to the workshop portion of Ministry Week. This, you're in the room for Communion Behind the Curtain, learning Christ-like love in a post-Christian world. If you do not mean to be here, feel free to exit or let your curiosity take over and hang out a bit. We have a panel of brilliant minds, thinkers, voices, who I think will help us have a really fruitful and generative conversation. So I'm going to read their bios. Since there are 4 of them, and I don't want to be like, read, let's clap after each person to kind of welcome them. So we will start with Leah Jordan. Dr. Leah Jordan is a native of Fort Worth, Texas. She's a womanist, a writer, thinker, and a preacher, a very, very good preacher.
Yeah.
Dr. Jordan is a proud graduate of Brite Divinity School, MDiv 2015, and she's currently serving as a hospice chaplain with Magnolia Hospice in Arlington, Texas. In addition to her chaplaincy, she works to cultivate spiritual spaces for millennials who've been displaced from the Black church. She recently earned her Doctor of Ministry in Womanist Preaching at Memphis Theological Seminary. Please welcome Dr. Leah Jordan.
Dr. Leah Jordan.
We also have Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove. Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove is an author, preacher, and community builder who has worked with faith-rooted movements for social change for more than 2 decades. He is Assistant Director for Partnerships at Yale Divinity School Center for Public Theology and Public Policy, an Associate Minister at the St. John's Missionary Baptist Church, and a Senior Democracy Fellow with the Public Religion Research Association. Wilson-Hartgrove is the author of more than a dozen books, including the Daily Prayer Guide, Common Prayer, A Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals, New Monasticism, The Wisdom of Stability, Reconstructing the Gospel, Revolution of Values, and most recently, White Poverty, with Bishop William J. Barber II. He is a regular preacher and teacher in churches across the U.S. and Canada. Please help me welcome Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove. Our next panelist is Philip Butler. Dr. Philip Butler is an international scholar whose work primarily focuses on the intersections of neuroscience, technology, spirituality, and Blackness. He uses the wisdom of these spaces to engage in critical and constructive analysis on Black posthumanism, artificial intelligence, and pluriversal future realities. He's also the founder of the Seeker Project, a distinctly Black conversational artificial intelligence with mental health capacities space. Butler has theorized artificial cognitive architectures for synthetic evolving life forms, SELF, presented on emotionally regulating and spiritual experience-inducing brain-computer interfaces, and has constructed blockchain protocols and conceptual logistics infrastructures for a world leader in the industrial hemp space. Butler is the author of Black Transhuman Liberation Theology, Spirituality and Technology, and most recently the editor of Critical Black Futures, Speculative Theories and Explorations. He's published in such journals such as The Black Scholar, the Journal of Post-Human Studies, and the Journal of Future Studies. He's currently working on a second monograph, Still Black Posthuman, A Theory of Uncertainty and Disorder. Please help me welcome Dr. Philip Butler. And moderating our panel this afternoon is Gary Green. Reverend Dr. Gary F. Green II is a former Division I college athlete and currently newly associate professor, yes, associate professor of pastoral theology and social transformation at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. Dr. Green is also the designer and founding director of Racial Intelligence Systems, founded as the Anti-Racist Initiatives at United, a 3-tiered reconditioning program that works to rewire the way institutions, often fail to, think about white supremacy and racial justice. He's also the author of Playing the Game, Embodied Brilliance Beyond the Moral Limits of Race in Sport, a theological satire that illustrates how Black athletes expose the colonial logic of white supremacy. Beyond his scholarly pursuits, Gary is a lover of his family, a student of stand-up comedy, and always an athlete at heart. Please welcome our moderator, Dr. Gary F. Green. Now, how this will go is Gary will help moderate the panel. They're going to be in conversation. They're going to flow. We're going to see where it goes from there.
We're going to
Take
see
it away, Dr. Green.
what kind of portal we open today. Thank you, Tommy. And why don't we give a round of applause for Tommy? Thank you. So I'm really excited for this panel, and I'm excited to engage all 3 of you all today and just to see where we end up, because I know that we're going to end up somewhere important. So welcome officially, everyone, to Communion Behind the Curtain, a conversation that considers what Christ-like love looks like in a post-Christian world. Now, I want to start by not taking anything for granted, given the potential ramifications of a cultural turn toward a world that we call post-Christian. I understand that even the idea of post-Christianity is not an agreed-upon conclusion. After all, we are at a Christian seminary. And yet, there are trends and data that suggest a growing number of people that previously identified as Christian who no longer do. which begs a different kind of attention to be paid, especially among ministers who hope to engage a world of faith that is transforming whether we want it to or not. So I want to begin our conversation by posing two questions, really a two-part question, to all three of you all. And then after that, we'll move through each of your expertise as it relates to this thing that we're talking about called post-Christianity. And then obviously the theme of this week is incarnating love. And so we'll bring it back toward the end to think about what does that even mean? What does that look like, especially in a world that is changing as it relates to religious and faith identity? So the opening question that I'm eager to ask each of you is, as a concept, what does post-Christian capture? What legitimacy do you believe that this has or not about what you see happening in the world, whether in relation to your network in particular or the United States at large? In other words, is there any legitimacy to this thing called post-Christianity as you see it in terms of where we're headed? And Leah, why don't you? Well, actually, I'll let y'all choose. We'll do a popcorn style. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, it seems I was voluntold, so I'll go ahead and jump into it. We are in church.
That's that Southern gentleman. I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
I love it. I love it. I'll answer personally and for my network.
Okay.
When I am asked if I am a Christian now, I'm finding that the answer is never no. It's not always yes, but it's never no. It really depends on who's asking and what they mean. If they're asking me, do I believe that Jesus is the only way to heaven and everybody else is going to burn in hell, well then, not really, but also post that, because I did once believe that. And then just to say a simple no would feel like a denial of not only my life orientation, but something that I'm still very much adjacent to, that shapes me and is not invisible in my world. So yeah. I understand and can relate to this post-Christian term. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, your experience is one that resonates with me because I listen to my children, I listen to my students, I listen to the people I sit beside on airplanes. I listen to the people who show up at demonstrations. And it's clear to me, as a Christian, I call myself a Christian. I call myself a Christian because I was raised on the Bible and I only know how to see the world through the Bible. And in the book of Acts, they called them Christian first at Antioch because they didn't know what else to call them.
Yeah.
Now, we've come a long way from that, but I identify with that movement, that first century movement. And so I call myself Christian, but I find so many friends who don't. And so I take seriously, the tradition of faith-seeking understanding, that St. Augustine passed down to us. And in that tradition, you know what you know because you believe, but to know what you know because you believe is to know that there are all kinds of things you don't know. And in that tradition, St. Thomas Aquinas said it like this. He said, all truth is God's truth. So I've always been on the lookout for wherever I can learn something. And I take this notion that we're in a post-Christian society to be something that we've learned from the sociologists, right? The sociologists who listen to how people talk. So, in a more systematic way than I listen to my kids or my students or people I meet along the way, they've noticed that there's a change. Over the past 4 or 5 decades, the number of people who in this country self-identify as none has doubled every decade. Right. And I always say that this is not good news for the convents. These are not the N-U-N-S, these are the N-O-N-E-S, the people who don't identify with the faith tradition that they were raised in. And I have to ask why. So I'll conclude my own reflection on this by just saying that my assessment is this. Because I've grown up and become an adult and lived my life in those 5 decades that I'm describing. And these are the stories I know. I know stories of people who grew up in the church, who learned their basic values and how they see the world in the church, and they watched the church betray those things that were taught to them.
Yeah.
Whether it was turning them away, turning away their queer friend,
Yeah.
endorsing some kind of Christian nationalism that's, wreaking havoc in this country or in other countries. It's not just here.
We're going to get to that.
Whatever the case, people have stories.
Right.
And when I look at the sort of aggregate data that says that the group of people who don't want to identify with the tradition they grew up in are, say none when they're asked, what is your religious identity? I understand.
Yeah.
I think that's where they're coming from. So I consider myself a friend and fellow traveler with all those people, but someone who very much still sees myself as a Christian. I don't know what else to be.
Yeah. Right
Thanks for letting me share.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
Now, I appreciate both of your reflections. And I think for me, what I'm noticing, or at least what's coming up in me, is like a post-centralization of things.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about this in terms of the way that, like you said, the nationalism that you may describe, or the betrayal you may describe, or what it means, right, to certain people. Like it also, I think in many ways, makes me think about a choice to orient and a binding to one particular way of being that in and of itself would not only be limiting, but also be dishonest to oneself. And so, like this post-Christian space, I think it means many things, but I think in a basic sense, it's an opening to potentially different rounds of multiplicity.
Yeah.
In addition to what it means then to think beyond the boundaries that one has been given as a mode of safety. And when folks lean into safety, they're also attempting to say that they are clear about the world. And I think in many ways, people are becoming less clear. And so to be post-Christian at the very least, right, it's a willingness to wrestle with the less clearness of things. And then what it means to walk alongside that as its own kind of sacred space and not as a place of fear.
I appreciate that, because what I hear is a kind of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and not to reduce what you just shared to this, but there's an embrace almost of not just curiosity, but also some ambiguity, and an acknowledgement that, you know what, this might have been the way I was raised. This is not, it don't add up the same way, and for whatever reason, maybe because of the betrayal, or just because of a certain posture of openness to wisdom from other traditions, so that one decides to orient themselves more expansively, perhaps. I'm curious, and we can work kind of back down the chain, because you began to speak to this, Philip, but as a possibility. So we talked about it as a concept, like does it capture what we see? As a possibility, what do you think it offers or takes away? From a kind of, I'm interested in your kind of more personal take on what does it open us up to, perhaps, or what does it close us off from?
I don't know, and we talk more, so forgive me, if I'm not very keen on the binary that you just provided. But I think in a nutshell, it does offer opportunity. And opportunity can be taken anyway, right? Folks who do like binaries would suggest like it opens up the door for bad things. But it also opens up the door for reframing. And so, right, we see folks who are embracing different traditions, or traditions more historically associated with a particular genetic lineage. And then the history is associated with what that means in terms of like the vilification or demonizing of said traditions. And then folks who are returning home. And so I think we've had this conversation in various kind of iterations, but I think at the very least it opens the possibility for folks to come back to themselves. But what that means is going to look something entirely different in terms of, right, incarnation, source, tradition, if you want to use your Wesleyan, quadrilateral or whatever. But nevertheless, the idea is kind of simple in the sense that people who they choose to be and who they are on their various paths of becoming are going to draw from various sources. And as a result, the possibility is closeness to certain things that folks may have been historically disassociated from, but also distanced from things that folks may have historically felt at home.
Yeah.
So I think there's that, the spaces in between that are, I think, where, you know, folks would say the journey is, but at the same time, it's also this potential space for experiences that they may not, on their face value, find, you know, to be the most, you know, I guess, ideal or what they wanted to, at least from the onset.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the possibilities are exciting and something to celebrate and embrace. And as a Christian person, I want to embrace the possibilities as a part of a healthy Christian tradition, right?
Yeah.
I mean, let's take the Bible, for example. A lot of it's not Christian.
Right.
Jesus wasn't one.
Right.
You know.
Can you say that again? That last part about that.
I mean, you know, I've learned a lot from Jesus. Jesus is a good Jew. He's not a Christian.
Right.
Not against Christians.
Right.
I've known him as a Christian, but
Right.
but I think it's so getting into the tradition and being able to say that, like, it's possible to inhabit the tradition and be open to these possibilities.
Right.
I think is one avenue this opens up. So, you know, let's read the whole Bible.
Right.
You know, there are priests forever in the order of Melchizedek.
Yeah.
I learned that when I was reading it in the King James.
Yeah.
You know, that's been with me all along.
Yeah.
Get over to the New Testament.
Yeah.
This Jesus shows up. You got the Magi from the East.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the folks from Persia. Whatever their religious tradition, it's not yours or mine.
Mm-hmm.
But they're celebrated in the story as the people who recognize this Messiah
Right.
for who he is.
Right.
So we got a lot of that within the tradition. We can go on after the Bible and talk about that too. So I want to affirm the possibility, but I also want to just take a moment, because I think it's worth conversation
Absolutely.
for us, to acknowledge the anxiety.
Yeah.
The anxiety that I've heard in the church and outside the church. There is an anxiety that comes with openness to anything, that people worry, what are we going to have to hold on to?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we give up this thing we've known,
That's
this
right.
certainty
That's right.
of what we've claimed to know, what can we be sure of?
Yeah.
And so I think pastorally, it's important to acknowledge that anxiety. You know, you live long enough, and you know, like, where people have to lean on what they know that they know that they know.
Right.
You know, when they get that call that the kid was killed in a car accident.
That's right.
You know, when you know, the unimaginable happens, people do need something to hang on to. And I think we have ample evidence that, you know, we do need in shared life in society some things that we can hold in common.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a democratic pluralist in this tradition. I'm not saying we need a Christian nation, but I do think that a lot of those people who got caught up in that were the anxiety that was being played on is a real one. It's
Right.
a real. People want to know what they know that they know.
Right.
And so I want to sort of wrestle within a tradition that has, like, openness to possibility, and that can say, you know, we do need some stable things to lean on when we face the hard stuff of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I agree with that, especially the pastoral part. I've been thinking a lot about the pastoral parts of post-Christianity, but to the first part of that, the possibility, I think, is a permissible space. And coming from womanism, that's my favorite thing about it, is that the space is so permissible to be and to learn and to ask questions and dance with spirit and whatever it is that I, you know, choose to or need to embody. At the same time, with that anxiety of, you know, unstable belief systems, for a lot of people, I'm observing post-Christian is meaning post-community.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a separate anxiety all
Right.
its own, and it's very sad, and it's something that I'm actively lamenting in my life and the life of people my age around me. So, yeah, it's both and for sure.
Yeah. Leah, I want to pick up on that, and that's actually probably my second question for you. So I'm gonna hold off, but I appreciate that point, especially the point about community. Because we know as people who exist, who breathe, who love, who connect, we need community. It's not just a piece to accentuate our existence with, but it is central to our existence. And so, but to begin kind of my more direct questions to you, and Leah is our resident expert womanist theologian, and I will say, and I wanted to name that because I, as a theologian, am a product of womanism. I've been shaped deeply by the permission that womanist thinkers gave me when I was in doing my studies. Shout out to Carrie Day, former professor at Brite, who is the person who I consider my mother in this ministry. She introduced me to womanist theology. And so, Leah, you were in a conversation recently with one of our co-conspirators, Reverend Dr. Tamise Spencer-Helms, and I want to invite you to build on a question that Tamise asked you when y'all were talking about this fourth wave of womanism, kind of where it's flowering, where it's blossoming, and how it's expanding. And you were asked to think about what you think the future looks like. Specifically, Tamise asked you, if womanism has its way over the next 5 to 10 years, what happens in the world? To which you replied, profoundly, I might add, that a lot of the people who are talking about expansion and liberation will feel permitted, you talked about permissibility, will feel permitted to have it themselves. And so I'm curious, if you're thinking about the coming into being of that world, is that world, or to what degree do you think that world is Christian?
To what degree is it Christian?
Or, better yet, what is the role of Christianity in either helping to usher in such a world, blocking it, or some blend of both?
Let me answer that this way.
Okay.
So I'll just give an example of purity culture.
Okay.
It's something that a lot of people have talked about, how it's harmful, how it's problematic. And so many of us have spent time in seminary talking about womanist theology and how it is sex positive, it is affirming, it is all of these things, which is in the classroom a theory. In your personal life, it could be nothing if the first thing you hear in your mind is your embedded theology. So I say that to say Christianity could be great if it will allow you to get past the theory into practice or into acceptance, because believing a thing in text or in literature is not the same as absolving yourself from sexual shame.
Yeah,
They're
that's
very,
right.
very different. And that's just
Absolutely.
one example. I think that applies, across the board. So
Right.
could Christianity usher in? It could participate, but I don't think it would be exclusively Christian.
Yeah, thank you. A part of that, and especially when you talked about the need to exercise shame, and something that you said in that same conversation that's connected to this is about this kind of return to oneself. And that was somebody else mentioned that, or I think, Philip, you mentioned that, which is a theme that I'm very intrigued about, especially as it relates to this widening space or this possibility of shifting one's belief in ways that perhaps do allow it to be easier to return to oneself. And so something you said and that I appreciated was that much of this expansion and liberation as it relates to the fourth wave is rooted ultimately in a return to oneself. And so, and I'm thinking especially as this return has to do with our sensuality, a part of our being that we know Christian tradition in its own unique ways has really fragmented us from. And maybe not always, but certainly in the church I grew up in, it was like, you don't love the flesh. In fact, it's the antithesis of loving the flesh. And so, I'm curious, to your mind, how might post-Christianity, or maybe you could think about it as the possibility that Dr. Butler named in terms of this kind of opening, how would this maybe offer more space for a kind of return to oneself in the sensual sense?
I love that question because when I hear the word flesh, even now, there's somewhere back there that's crucify the flesh.
Still some root work need to happen.
Right. And so I think the reframing of crucifying the flesh to disciplining
Right.
the flesh,
Okay.
which, love is a part of
Yeah.
discipline. They're connected.
Yeah.
But just being able to listen to your own body again, because
Yeah.
if all you hear is to crucify it,
Yeah.
then you won't listen to it.
Right.
You'll try to mute it, if anything else. And I
Right.
think once you can reclaim the voice of your body, which is not overnight,
Yeah.
then it will tell you what it needs and how to love it.
Yeah.
It'll tell you who it loves
Yeah.
or what it wants to eat or when it wants to rest. But if the body can't speak over the scriptures that are playing in your head, then it's going to be very, very difficult. So,
Wow.
yeah.
And what I hear in that, and I can't ignore this tension that comes up when I listen to that, because it's like how did you say that? If you can't hear the body over the scriptures, and it's like we understand that God can speak to us through our bodies and does,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that feels important to name, because so often, at least in my own upbringing, like if it's not in the Bible, it ain't God.
Right.
And it's like, well, we do know that this went through a process of canonization. Like there's some other stuff going on in this text that we've inherited, and yet we know that if we take seriously Imago Dei, which I also play with in my book as Imago DNA, because I think all of us is sacred, then there's something afoot in that tension. On this question, I'm curious, how would you respond to Christian pastors or other religious leaders who might hear this and wonder how the church can begin to hold more space for an embrace of our flesh?
Gosh, I love that. I think maybe because there's so much in the Bible, and right now that is our central text, we can lean on some different verses. While we've put a lot of weight on crucifying the flesh,
Right.
we could maybe go to Genesis a little more and talk about the flesh coming from the earth, and that could lead us to earth-connected peoples and traditions and all of those things. So I think it's just, where we're open to placing our priorities.
I like that.
And what we're open to shifting in our canon.
Yeah.
But everything, I think, is available to us already.
That's fair, because it's not a single narrative. Thank you
Right,
for
right.
naming that.
Can I ask a question?
Please, yeah,
about-
and let me say, at any point, anybody can jump in, so thank you.
I want to ask about another shared text, because a lot of this conversation, I think, is about like the culture and the space and the stories that we share. So Ryan Coogler's given us another shared text.
Yes, Lord.
Yes.
And I wonder what you make of, I mean, if anybody hasn't seen it, I'm talking about the movie Sinners, which is, as I read it, a meditation on faith and human struggle in this country that takes all of this about, the church's, I think the church's sin of denying the body.
Yeah.
It addresses that head on.
Yeah.
But it really struck me, and when I took my daughter to see the movie, I said, "Now you got to sit here until the very last scene, because there's like there's two scenes, because when he comes back into the church at the end, and he's singing "This Little Light of Mine" in a very clear blues inflection,
Yeah.
it seems to me that text is saying something about even the redemption of the Christian tradition. So I wanted to kind of pose that. How do you read that text in terms of this question of the body and the way we deal with, sensuality in this culture?
Gosh, let me try to make this concise. I could talk about sinners about 8 hours.
You ain't lying.
But that's just such a good point. It has so much to say about the flesh, like you say. The similarity in the blues music and the gospel music, which we don't see in that movie, but we know about it, says something to us about just our rhythm in the body. and how we affirm that. And I think the message of him singing that and refusing to leave that guitar behind
That's right.
is the message that we have to take with us if we're going to do this post-Christian thing and live. Right? We have to take our bodies and the things that we're gifted with into this new way of living. So I love that question.
Even when the church wants you to put it down.
Right, but it's my light.
Exactly.
I can't.
But
Exactly.
I didn't read like a reconciliation with Christianity.
Yeah,
Like,
say more.
the vampire, the man started praying, and the vampire finished the prayer for him. Like, now are you done? So we can continue fighting now. And so, I don't know if it was a redemption story for Christianity at all. I think it was more an indictment of it in many ways.
Yeah. Well, especially when you think about when this kind of culmination where it's like, are you going to choose here or are you going to leave with this guitar? And he left with the guitar.
He left with the guitar, and it almost, if you were to watch it, I don't want to say backwards, but like the dad was almost the devil in that one. And if the dad's the devil and he's the preacher, then what's the commentary that's being made?
Right. Yeah.
No, it's a good point. I mean, I think the love and fellowship of the vampire is a form of Christianity that's being taken, head on.
I need you to define Christianity. Because this is now you're confusing me. I'm not going to lie to you.
Oh, well, I'm using it in the way that sociologists use it. That is to say, people who call themselves Christian are...
So just the nomenclature.
The nomenclature, yeah. So he portrays, if you haven't seen the movie, he portrays this vampire, as a devotee of a form of Christianity that says, let me in. It's just love and fellowship. I think anybody who's been involved in white evangelical culture is familiar with that. So there's a critique of that happens. There's also, I think, a critique of what you're talking about, the church that he had been raised in, and they had told him, put down that blues music. But what I'm trying to wrestle with, tell me if you don't think it's there, but when in the very last scene, he's back in the church with his guitar playing a song that had been sung by the church earlier, but playing it in a different inflection. I at least heard that as an invitation to bring the traditions together.
Yeah, I have not applied that particular lens to that. And I think I was trying to read through the spoilers that you saw, and it was like, you're supposed to see like a bad shadow or somewhere in there, so I wasn't even looking for that. But I think it's something about like this kind of the things that you carry with you, right?
Yeah.
Like you talk in the back of your mind, you still hear this, like these younger versions of you or older versions of you or just versions of your family members that pop up, through your facial expressions or whatever. So I don't know. I think at the very least, the invitation was more so not to a blind sense of community whereby everybody knows everything about everyone. Because you also could think it's a commentary on privacy, a commentary on security, a commentary on culture appropriation and gatekeeping. Like you can say all types of things about it, but I think on some level, the coming back to oneself is a recognition that like who you are in this moment is a stamp in time, and you are somewhere along this larger train of cycles that will inflect and at various points, regardless of who's born through your bloodline or not.
Yeah,
So I think, I think that's more so what I was kind of seeing.
Well, I also want to name too, speaking of nomenclature, and the tension between, like Leah, you talked about the kind of rhythms that we embody, and how, and this is something that I deal with in my book, and we'll actually come back around to this, Philip, when I'm asking you questions, but there's a separation, this tension between embodied rhythms and then what we articulate, as far as what name we give that. And I see that tension happening as well, because, when you talk about the blues and the black church might have denigrated the blues and yet embodied it in many respects. And you cannot separate them, right? But if it goes by the name of blues or goes by the name of R&B, it's demonic. And that's not all churches, but we've heard this narrative before. And at the same time, the cadence to my body might be the exact same. It might be the same kind of embodied rhythm, the same kind of aura that I'm giving off, whether I'm in a blues club or whether I'm in the black church. And so there's something to be said about that. There's something to be said about the incomplete list of names in general. To name or to try to conceptualize or understand an existence that is always in motion, that is continually unfolding. And I'm just going to pause there because we're going to come back to that. I don't want to get too far afield. But Leah, to come back to, since we're talking about the black church, that was a perfect segue. I didn't mean to do that. And y'all, thank you for that. But you are trained in the black church. I mean, your MDiv is squarely about black church studies. And you have more recently thought about, in conversations that we've had, about hush harbors, hush harbor praxis, particularly for black millennials who are finding community in spaces outside of the institutional church. And so I'm wondering, what might, quote unquote, church look like for someone who might say that they're post-Christian?
I love that question, and I love hush harbor praxis and ethics. But for context, I'll give you this. So the name of my doctoral project was Saving Sundays, Creating Space for Millennials Displaced from the Black Church. And I use the word displaced intentionally because this wasn't a group of people that just decided one day, oh, I'm an atheist, or oh, I don't want to go to church anymore, oh, I'm bored. No, there were things that happened that pushed them away. They would be in church, but they're not for a number of reasons. Yeah. And so when we began our conversation, the surveying and all that, I asked them, okay, so what are some of the things that you miss? You say you miss church, but people were, I miss the music, or I miss the community, or I miss the sound of black voices singing. Yeah. You know what nobody missed? Preaching. Interesting. I'm a preacher giving
You're talking to a room full of preachers?
I am a preacher as well, but nobody missed that.
Yeah.
And, I had to be honest with myself and think I really didn't miss it either. And it wasn't because of the style, and it wasn't because sermons were too long.
Say that.
It was because, often the theology hadn't kept up with public consciousness. Yeah. So when we gathered together, one of the things that I did, the first thing that I did was cut the sermon. I cut my proclamation out of it and instead looked at a text. I looked at the Adam and Eve text because my thing is Scripture, probably lives in you if you're coming to me in this context. So we can, give it new life, or we can let it stay as a weapon inside of you. Right. So I went through the Adam and Eve text and talked about, maybe Eve isn't the first sinner, but perhaps the first woman is. So just that kind of reframing, since we already know text. And the second part of it was, instead of me preaching, we watched a film. Yeah. Yeah. We watched the film and we took a minute to exegete art because it had kept up with the public consciousness. And so we created this space where we permitted ourselves to name and select our text and stand on it and pray with it and be in community with it, and it was quite successful. So
being able to re-engage and reinterpret and keep the parts that feel right, the parts of the bonding, the community, the co-regulation that often happens, but perhaps bracketing the stuff that has historically maybe alienated some of us. And like you said, displaced people from this space. Yes, and to add, a lot of people were naming that, now we're learning about African spirituality and these faiths that we had before they were taken from us. We put an altar in the room. That's right. And I invited people to bring photos or artifacts of their ancestors if they wanted to. We had candles. We had all these different elements that all of us were taught were demonic. That's right. And we put it in the living room. That's right. And it worked. It's interesting because that also reminds me of Sinners, and one of my favorite scenes, and y'all already know what scene I'm talking about, when the magic, the embodied, what I call embodied magic scene, where you could look at that, if you're looking at that through a lens of the black church, it's like, oh, they were caught up in the spirit. Holy Ghost. Holy Ghost was in that place, right? And I have, I have an interpretation of that in terms of where that emanates from, especially in the kind of unison of the rhythmic movements and chanting and singing together. And I think that's holy, and I think that's divine. And it pre-exists sometimes again, the name that we give it.
Yes.
And I remember also hearing folks and seeing folks online talking about, oh no, that was, there's something wrong with that. That was devil. That was demonic. And so we might come back around to this conversation, because this is something that I'm very energized about talking through, and really being able to give ourselves space to reclaim some of these rhythms that have lived in our bodies before. So yeah, thank you, Doctor. Jonathan, I want to direct some questions towards you now. So specifically, and Tommy already mentioned the 50 million books that you've read, that you've written, and you're a preacher, you're a community builder, someone I think who is uniquely positioned to speak to the role and the importance of Christian morality in peacemaking and justice work. And we find ourselves at a point in history where the need for peacemaking and justice work is critically important and urgent. Much of your work, as I see it, just to do a little bit of framing, has to do with maintaining or even reclaiming a moral sensibility in relation to Christian responsibility. Now, that's not to say that's the only way that you approach your work or the only thing you do, but when I think about your Substack podcast with Reverend Barber, Our Moral Moment, when I think about Moral Mondays, which is how I initially, years ago, even came into contact with Reverend Barber and learned of who he was and the work that he's doing. And much of the other work that you're involved in, it's clear that morality is a centerpiece. And one of the things that you've talked about in one of the recent episodes on the podcast was about the slipperiness of morality as a category, which is something that the title of my book is Playing the Game Embodied Brilliance Beyond the Moral Limits of Race and Sport, because one of the frustrations that I've had for a long time is how we devolve into these debates about race at a moral level and just miss each other, because one person can exist in a completely different moral universe than you. So naming the slipperiness, and yet at the same time, we also know that we are all relating based on some operative morality, even if unconsciously. And so I'd love to hear that you reflect on, what do you see as the role of Christian morality in peacemaking or justice work, especially as situated in a world that may or may not be moving towards something called post-Christian?
Maybe I can build a bridge from what you're saying to this question, because I'm really struck by your pastoral sensibility in terms of creating a community where all of the cultural symbols and stories that people have embodied and so bring with them into the space can be affirmed as sources of truth that that bring people together. There are forms of religiosity that, as you were suggesting, sort of teach people to buck up against that. But as a pastor myself, I want to say that I think that's a poor reading of the tradition, kind of in the lines of what I was saying earlier. And I was just working with a text recently in 1 Kings, and if you take the prophets, Elijah, Elisha, seriously, I mean, worshiping false gods is a big deal.
Right.
I mean, that of the commandments that they say are being broken.
That's right.
You're worshiping false gods. That's the problem. But it's striking to me that they, even in their own cultural context, they don't take that where a fundamentalist preacher might take it. It's not that, because even in the story of the Canaanite world they're living in, you've got El and you've got Baal. They're both from that world.
Yeah.
And they're playing them, to try to understand what points to truth. Mm-hmm. The problem with Baal is not that the Canaanites worship him; it's that he will take your life. Mm-hmm. He will kill you. And he wants people to understand that. So sort of thinking along those lines, I believe moral movements in any society, in any cultural context, are about trying to find the narratives, the symbols, the ways to truth that we have, and you know, wherever people are coming from, we're living in a very pluralistic society, so there are many.
Right.
But find where they point us to a truth that we can affirm together, and how that can be a binding story,
right?
And create binding practices that give us a sense of a shared vision for the future. Because what I want to say in terms of where the church is in this whole conversation about a post-Christian society is that the ways that Christianity, and again, like Christianity as practiced, that, you know, people calling themselves Christian, abusing power and using it to crush other people.
That's right.
Has created a context where there is a lot of critical discourse directed at that false moral narrative. People don't have so much of an alternative moral narrative often, right? And so that's where I think moral movements are incredibly important. And so it's a reading of history that I learned from Bishop Barber and that he learned from his parents and the movement in the mid-20th century, but that's very much about saying that the things that have been able to bring people together and to push us toward a society that's actually better for all people are moral narratives that offer an alternative to this distortion. So Frederick Douglass's phrasing of it, I think, is the one that kind of sticks with me, particularly because I come from the Christian tradition. He said, between the Christianity of the slaveholder and the Christianity of Christ, I see the widest possible difference. You can understand this, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who was raised by people, called themselves Christian, told him, I own you. He said, I prayed for my freedom for 20 years. Didn't find it until I prayed with my feet, right? So you had to take direct action to get away from that. But then, you know, at the end of his own narrative is where he wrestles with this and says, you know, given the story I've told, given the ways that my own life was taken from me by people who call themselves Christian, you might think that I wouldn't be Christian.
Yeah.
He says, oh no, between the Christianity of the slaveholder and the Christianity of Christ, I see the widest possible difference. So that's the context in which he's making that distinction. And I think that is a claiming of a moral narrative.
Yeah.
So for him, you know, it was the biblical prophets, it was Christianity, certainly in the AME tradition that he found, you know, when he got away. But it was also, you know, the constitutional traditions of this country, simply because that was a shared language. I don't think he thought that the Constitution was the best thing that had ever been written.
Right.
He wasn't making that claim.
Right.
He was saying, this is what you decided to put on paper. This is what you say you're trying to do here. What, you know, you called me here to talk about your 4th of July. What to me is your 4th of July? I'm not free. Right? That's what he's trying to say. So that's my sense of what it means to claim the moral narrative that can bring us together with our shared traditions and stories. And, you know, it's always complicated and messy, but such is humanity.
Such is humanity, and the complicated mess of it, I can't shake how do you distinguish between false moral narratives and ones that you might believe are true, especially when we think about the kind of inherent democratic problem here where the government and some of the kind of far-right Christian nationalists that we will talk about here in just a second are claiming their narrative as a moral narrative as well. And it's the same kind of justification when you think about the like manifest destiny. You think about the historical justifications of enslaving African people in the name of God. These were moral narratives. So how do we, especially thinking about for pastoral leaders or religious leaders, how are we to wrestle between, or how are we to know, or I'm just kind of curious how you work through that tension, or would invite people to think about that tension when both or all parties are claiming their truth or their narratives as the moral narrative. Because we can say false narrative, but it's like, according to who?
Yeah. I think people know when a story's killing them.
I don't know.
Say more. Yeah, please say more about that. Yeah.
Because I think what I was hoping to hear more about, even in your story of Frederick Douglass, is his use of root work to get himself free. But that wasn't something that was agreed upon, and that you see his singular example of his freedom. Because I'm like, why didn't they come get him?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was a root he held on to.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're just thinking about other inserts into the story that add a different layer. That's all. I'm just curious. Yeah.
No, and I'm open to it. I think there are all sorts of things he was drawing on, but to take that story, I would say, he is someone who is clearly able to identify the false moral narrative because it justifies his slavery.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very complicated for him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he spent 30 years going around, trying to persuade other people. And if we pay attention to that moral re-narrating that he does, I think there's a lot to learn in terms of how you can expose false moral narratives by demonstrating their internal inconsistencies. I think that's what he does brilliantly in the speeches that he would give, and clearly, as evidenced by the responses, not always immediately persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the American Abolitionist Society sent people out in twos. Jesus said send people out 2 by 2. But the job was with a very small pension that you went into a town, you secured a place to hold the evening meeting. You got the bill printed and went around town advertising it all day. You held the meeting with full knowledge that you were probably going to be run out of town at the end of the meeting,
mm-hmm.
right? So they had plenty of evidence that they were not persuading people, and yet they understood, from their own perspective, that it was an internally inconsistent moral narrative, and so they were determined to take it down.
What about revolution? However you conceive it, what is or what part should the Christian faith, particularly as you understand it, play, if any, in the kind of revolution that you might believe we need right now? And I don't mean to suggest that you believe we need a revolution, although when we talk about the authoritarian regime that I've heard you speak about, I want to kind of unpack that. So, but before that, I'm curious what you see as the role of the Christian faith in enacting a kind of different political way of being in relation to what is needed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Dr. King's phrase from the mid-20th century is a revolution of values, right?
Okay.
And that puts it very much in the moral terms.
Right.
I think he was trying to address
Right.
with that phrase, as were many of the people in that movement, the need to build pressure to change the moral narrative.
Yeah.
And on this theme of incarnating love,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking a lot about love this week, not just because Valentine's Day is coming, although I think it has something to do with it.
Trying to stay in good graces with your partner.
We all saw the halftime show,
Yeah.
and the billboard was clear.
Yeah.
What he had said at the Grammys, the
Yeah.
only thing more powerful than hate is love.
That's it.
I take that to be an affirmation of the nonviolent love ethic that certainly Gandhi
Yeah.
experimented with in terms of a public practice.
Mm-hmm.
One of my teachers, a man named Jim Douglas, told me when I was young, he was raised Catholic, and he said, this is what I had to come to terms with as a Catholic, that I had been taught to follow Jesus, and the most faithful disciple of the teachings of Jesus in the century when I was born was a man who was a Hindu.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I had to wrestle with that.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
That's right.
I think that's an example of what we're talking about, right? That there are different traditions by which we can come to a shared truth that is recognizable within our traditions.
Right.
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 And so he was not in any way saying that Gandhi was some kind of secret Christian or this or that, but just saying that in terms of if you pay attention to what Jesus taught and told people was a way towards liberation in this world, no one had practiced that, had sort of developed a concrete practice for how that could be lived out, particularly over and against oppressive colonial regimes, more powerfully than Gandhi had. Well, I think that was a recognition that much of the black church in North America in the early 20th century shared. And there was an ongoing conversation about how the nonviolent love ethic of Jesus could be put into practice, using the tactics that Gandhi had been experimenting with to bring down Jim Crow. A lot of what we talk about today as the civil rights movement or the Southern Freedom Movement was a movement that grew out of a kind of theological reflection and practice that was, very much within the Christian tradition, but that was trying to take seriously what could be learned from this very real experience in the world. And that's the kind of power of love that I really want to help people tap into in this moment.
Yeah.
Because, we see a lot of hate. I think people understand that the hate is destructive, that it harms them in particular ways, that they can see other people who are hurting. I don't know that we've practiced that love, the sort of daily practices of beloved community in ways that have fully unleashed that. And so my sense of the moment is that we need to both, learn from the past, but also be conducting our own experiments in truth, to use Gandhi's language of, how can that love be put into practice to really set people free? And whether we use the language of revolution or not, that's kind of the goal that I have in mind.
I appreciate this, Jonathan. I appreciate, and this was something that I wanted to ask you about anyway, and so I want to ask about this now to get you to speak, because you talk about not just love. I like the language of unleashing. I don't think we're conditioned to think about love as something that can unleash a kind of power that can transform. Maybe because of the connotation that it has in relation to power in the ways that we've been, the exhibitions of power that we're accustomed to seeing. But it's clear that you take Christ-like love seriously, and not just as something that is a kind of pacifying balm, but is a kind of, I would say, a revolutionary power. And, with the work, what you do with the Rutba House, with your commitment to nonviolence, as a political strategy for transformation that is rooted in love. And then you talked about Gandhi, and you quoted Gandhi in a recent conversation, where to lean into the love that we have for our neighbors and for our place is more powerful than anything the government or empire has, that we have something more powerful than weapons. And so I'm curious if you could just speak more about how is love more powerful than weapons or hate? Because that's something that resonates when we hear it. It resonated with Bad Bunny said it. It resonates right now. It resonated with King said it. It has resonated through history, through time, regardless of religious tradition. And so how can we begin to think about love perhaps in a different way as a force that can be a revolutionary force?
I think that's important. Love is a force. Another of my teachers was Reverend Jim Lawson, and he often told the story about when he went to Little Rock. They called him in to train the Little Rock Nine before they went. Jim had grown up reading those newspapers, where it was the black press. People reported on what Gandhi was doing. He went to India. He was studying Gandhi when the bus boycott started in Montgomery. So was really a great teacher of the practice of how we unleash this force. And when he went to Little Rock, he said the first thing he asked these, young people was, what are you planning to do? And they said, well, our parents have told us we can't fight back. And he said, that's wrong. And he said he had to be gentle because their parents had told them.
Right.
So he didn't want to lay into them.
Right.
But he said, what you have to understand is that you have to fight back with something more powerful than what they have. And he began to talk to them about, and he was a very practical person in that he always just wanted to game things out, right? So like he would tell some stories about how things have been done, but then it was like, okay, what's the worst thing they do to you? Mm-hmm. They bomb us. What does that mean? Well, they'll wrap a piece of paper around a rock and they'll throw it at us when we come into class. Okay, let's talk about how could you respond? Mm-hmm. So it was very practical in that way. And that kind of training in the practice of nonviolence, I think, is what's important in terms of, being able to unleash it, to use that word. I mean,
that's right.
But the notion here is that if you really do believe that the world comes from love, mm-hmm. right? That the source of life is love. Mm-hmm. That, to quote the great poets, that, love is what moves the sun and the other stars, then there has to be a way to tap into that. That was what really got Gandhi.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
We might not have learned how yet, but there has to be a way to do that.
Yeah.
And his basic insight in that love letter he wrote back to India on his first, trip back to South Africa after he had gone back, it's called the Hind Swaraj. It's about home rule. And he says, if you're living under occupation, you know the people and the place better than anybody. So if you can lean into your love for your neighbor, right, in a way that activates what he called it at that time was a passive resistance mm-hmm. to the occupation, there are more of you than there are of them, so they can never occupy you if you're united in that resistance. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's an insight that has to be fleshed out. And a lot of his life was, and he didn't always get it right, and he was honest about that. Certainly the various movements have not always gotten it right. But I think when we really do believe that,
yeah,
we can conduct those experiments and we can build the kind of solidarity that not only exposes the hate for the weakness that it is.
That's right.
But that also gives us the connections we need to build the kind of communities we want.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why I think the practice of nonviolence is always about building up beloved community. That's what John Lewis always said. That's what Diane Nash has always said, that they learned in Nashville when they studied with Jim Lawson for a year before those first sit-ins. It was really the embrace of the pursuit of beloved community as a way of life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is a lot of what pastors are supposed to do, right?
Mm.
Build beloved communities.
Mm-hmm.
Not just to provide people for the next march,
right?
but to provide a life that's really life for people.
Yeah.
That can set them free and set neighbors free and lead us toward a better place. So, yeah, that's how I see that connection.
And I really like thinking about, or how you're inviting people to think about strategic ways, and I would say even playful ways sometimes. And a lot of my work has to do with play and what can be born from when you are in that kind of even physiologically from an embodied state. And love, we can talk all day about love, and love in the body looks a lot different than hate. Hate has a constricting kind of neurophysiological kind of movement, whereas love, especially activating something you talking about strategically trying to figure out, how do I tap into this? How do I activate it? Has this kind of, it's not a constricting force. And so I think that there are more ways, in which I appreciate this invitation, there are ways to think about love that is not just passive. Right? It might not be violent. It might not participate in violence. It might not even reciprocate violence, which does speak to me a kind of depth of power that does feel like it transcends in many respects my ability to reciprocate the kind of energy that you might give me in a hateful sense. And so that's something that I'm excited to talk about. I want to explore that more. Maybe we will come back around to that toward the end. But the last question I want to ask you, before I move to Philip is, we can't speak of revolution without acknowledging the obvious reference point from which so many people need release right now. And you've talked in helpful ways and openly about our political government, specifically, as you say, the growing realization that this is an authoritarian regime. A regime that claims Christianity as religious justification for removing women's rights to their own bodies, targeting queer and trans people as threats to our children, never mind the contents of those files that they still don't want to completely release, and deporting immigrants based on the idea of protecting the presumed purity of a nation that was supposedly founded on Christian values. I'm curious to know, how would you respond as a pastor to someone who says that they can't in good conscience claim Christianity because of what it has become? Or how would you respond to pastoral leaders that have questions about how am I to lead a congregation in the name of the same name, where so many people are being targeted and quite honestly killed?
Well, I'm on the openness side of things. I let people call themselves whatever they want to call themselves. So
That's fair.
I'm not particularly concerned about trying to persuade people that they need to identify in a particular way. And because of the force of moral narratives, when I talk with fellow Christians, people who do name themselves that way, I think it's incredibly important at a time like this to say, no, you don't get to take this language. This is powerful stuff. I mean, it's at the most basic level, it's powerful to people. I mean, I know people who raised me,
Yeah.
who say the most important thing that ever happened to me was when I invited Jesus in my life, and there's nothing more important to me than my faith and my church family. Well, if there are those people, and there's a political movement that has decided that they're going to exploit that in order to gain power so that they can abuse all kinds of people, including many of those people, then I think the church has to say, no. Some of us, I mean, this is where I think a little conviction actually goes a long way.
Yeah.
Some of us actually told the person who we think to be the creator of the universe that we were going to do our best to proclaim the word that spoke the world into creation.
Yeah.
And if you've made that promise, and you're aware that this is happening, I think we have a basic responsibility to at least say that's not it.
Yeah.
So, when Mike Johnson comes out last week, says, when, the reporter says, when Jesus says, welcome to stranger, what do you take that to mean? Right. And he goes on this thing about, he basically uses the Bible to justify what ICE is doing.
Absolutely.
Which they do, of course. If you've seen their Instagram posts or whatever, they're using scripture to recruit people.
Absolutely.
So this religious nationalism runs through that whole culture. No, I think when that kind of thing happens, we have a responsibility to challenge it. So he ended his, I'll just close by saying this, he ended his little press availability by saying that he didn't have time to go over all the theological issues that he wanted to talk about, but that he would be happy to have that debate with anyone, anytime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I immediately called my brother William Barber, because we're planning a public theology conference. Hope any of you are free, and April will come. It's at Yale Divinity School. We have it every election year, a public theology conference. I said, do we still have space on the program that we can extend an invitation? And he said, of course.
Yeah.
So I called over
to
his office, and let me be honest, I emailed over to his office, because we don't use phones that way anymore, and extended the invitation. His very polite scheduler said, I'm so sorry, he's not available those days.
I could have guessed.
To which I replied, that's okay. Tell us when he's available.
Yeah.
We'll schedule it.
That's right.
I have not yet heard back, but if I do, I'll let you know.
Please do, because I'm trying to.
Because I do think it's just to come back to the theme, I do think that's our responsibility.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, like, those of us who've promised to be preachers of the Christian gospel, if Christianity is being used in such a way, we have a basic responsibility just to our people to publicly say, no, that's not the faith. Because again, that is the reason that many people who were raised in the church give for why they don't want anything to do with it anymore.
Yeah.
And I completely acknowledge that harm is real. And to your point, I'm a pastor because I believe people need community. And so whatever form that takes, I want them to find community. And I think that means there have to be communities that are able to, bring people together around a narrative that can say, that's untrue. But there are a lot of things that are true. And we're going to gather around those things that are true.
Yeah. Thank you. And for what it's worth, if Mike Johnson does accept your invitation, please let me know, because I would love to see y'all in conversation. Although I'm not going to hold my breath.
If we have the conversation, it will be public.
Yes, absolutely. It needs to be. Just live streaming. Philip, I want to bring my attention to the questions that I've crafted for you, and also probably riff a little bit because you dropped some nuggets earlier that I want to pick up on. So, first of all, it's one thing to talk about post-Christianity. It's another thing to talk about post-humanism, specifically black post-humanism. And so to even get started, I just want to invite you. Can you tell us a little bit about what post-humanism is? And I'm asking you this because I think it's important. I think it gets to a certain root that grounds this conversation in a way that really can help us grab things a little differently and more deeply, perhaps. But can you tell us a little bit about what post-humanism is, what black post-humanism is, maybe how it's different, and how post-humanism as a frame can invite us to think differently about ourselves in relation to each other and the natural world?
You mean three-part question?
Hey, man, listen, I basically just wax eloquent on your expertise. Yeah.
Where is all right. So
what it is, what is the distinction of black post-humanism, and how does it invite us to think of ourselves in relation differently?
I'm going to come back to you if I need
Please do.
So in a nutshell, post-humanism, kind of in a broader sense, and when I mean broader sense, it's predominantly what has been understood within the academy within the last 20 so years from a European / kind of Western-centric perspective, is really just a decentering of man, or the decentering of humanity. And what it does primarily is an attempt to engage in a level of species reconfiguration from an ontological perspective, mainly suggesting that people man as being removed from the center is at the same value space as nature, right? And so this suggests that you have the same value and worth as the tree or the chair that you're sitting in, more so the tree in this framework. And what this does is it attempts to kind of bring the rest of the world forward, but what it lacks is a level of complexity around this kind of reconfiguration of value. And I think and this allows for, you can read the Post-Human Manifesto, where it talks about this doesn't take away from materiality or immateriality. It acknowledges nonlinear thinking, all these kind of beautiful things, post-structuralism, post-truth, if that's your thing or not. But when we start talking about black post-humanism, what we're really talking about is the idea of the human more broadly. And so this is where you can think about folks like a Sylvia Wynter, think about Zakiya Jackson, or just thinkers that really question, continue to trouble the notion of the human, meaning, at least within this framework, right? One thing I've said previously, and I lean into more so in black post-humanism, is that humans don't exist. Mm-hmm. And what do I mean by that? Is that, right, the idea of the human is a technological construct. And at one point I said that it was a construct that is primarily a production and an extension of cis heteronormative whiteness and its binaries. But what I have come to understand more explicitly is that humanity as a construct is more so tethered to notions of empire and proximities to power. Because if you look at this from a historical perspective, the notion around the human is more so a notion around citizenship and notions around rights and privileges that are extended to folks who are a part of a particular empire. Because if you go back, you think about Rousseau, you could think about Hume, you could go back and think about the Greeks. But most of the Greeks studied in Egypt, and so if you look at the papyri, right, the notion is that the Egyptians at one point said they were the only humans. And if the Egyptians were the only humans, and we're part of a tradition today that says something similar, given the way that humanity as a thing of privilege is extended and taken away from certain groups depending upon the moment, given what we're looking at today, then the notion really is about who belongs, who is protected, and who is at the center. And so when we talk about this in a Western context around blackness, given the way that blackness has always existed outside of the realm of humanity, whether it be sub, super, or monstrous, we're also talking about the ways in which blackness, humanity is antithetical to blackness, and so black post-humanism very clearly suggests that it's anti-human, given that humanity has always been antithetical to black folks. And so in a nutshell, when we talk about this, not only are we decentering humanity, we're moving it as the linchpin of reality, because in the post-human or post-Christian framework, we would also be critical of the notion that if God was actually at the center of Christianity, because God is not the one who needs saving. God is not the one who needs a second chance. God is not the one who is really at this, the crux of it all. And if that's the case, then you could argue very much so it's post-Christian in the notion that it does not set up a center. It almost looks like the universe where there's nothing there. And there are as many vantage points as there are things that exist.
Yeah. And I appreciate, I remember when I read, and I'm gonna come back to this, but I'm gonna name it now because I remember matter of fact, I'll go into it and we'll get there. Because specifically about what you just said, I think one of the things that I really appreciated about your work when I approached it years ago and the permission that it gave me as somebody who had this intuitive sense, you know, in my work, I take up beast in the context of sports. And from the standpoint of how you talk about, you could think about the history of the way black men are configured in our minds as beasts in a subhuman sense, but also what I see it play out in sports or entertainment is how black men also are cast in this superhuman sense, where either way you're not human. Whether it's a fear or a fetish, either way you cannot live into this category, which puts pressure on the category, helps us understand the category was never made for you. That's why no matter how human you act, you still will not fit into the category. But one of the ways that you push me is also thinking about technology and artificial intelligence. And so in your book, in Black Transhuman Liberation Theology, if y'all have not read it, please do yourself a favor. But you talk about the body as technology and how we are really comprised of, especially if we put human to the side, then it's like, who are we? What are we? And how we are comprised of interacting systems upon systems upon systems, right? That are powered by vitality, by this vital life force that permeates all existence. And this is where, just to note, where when you think about my body or your body, or you think about a tree, then talking about vitality as a force that permeates all existence, it brings us closer to the natural world in ways where you see we're powered by the same kind of energy. And so in a real sense, you give permission to think of ourselves outside of the context or boundaries perhaps of human as a category, but instead as conduits of the divine.
Right.
And when I think about that, I can't help but wonder, and there's a lot of things I wonder when I think about that, but what are the implications of this, not just for Christianity, or this conversation about post-Christianity, but for any articulated religion in general? Like how do you conceive of religion, whether the purpose of religion or I'm just kind of curious to play with that with you, especially as we talked earlier about sinners and how you named, which I appreciated, the kind of extra Christian root work perhaps that Frederick Douglass and so many others did in order to enact freedom.
No, and it was funny when you brought up like that scene, and a lot of folks go to the dancing scene, but the other scene that immediately came to my mind before it was apparent that you were talking about the dancing scene was the first root scene when he went to visit the site of his dead child.
Yeah.
And so, like, to me, because there are moments in the story where like the screen beyond the person gets a little blurry. And not just blurry, but it seems to shake around them.
Yeah.
Or like there
Yeah,
be
yeah.
different inflections in the voice and that kind of stuff. And so
Yeah.
for me, that was the first kind of root scene. And, you know, and his hurt and his pain, because he was very much so intertwined with the woman who was responsible for the root work in the community.
Right.
And knowing that he was able to be, I guess in my own way to relate to Smoke, right, he was able to be as chaotic as he wanted. He could go and be a criminal. He could go overseas and he could do all these things, and he was frustrated, and all he could see was power and money. But she reminded him very quickly, "Have you still got that?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And he pulled it up out of his sack. He said, "How you know I've been back here sending the energy to you to make sure you have every protection possible."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, in a very real sense, like, you talk about vitality, right? This particular culmination. Like, and I was thinking about this earlier, maybe yesterday. Like, when the old folks pray for you, or thinking about not always growing up in, or having to be, for instance, like one of the few black people in certain classrooms and stuff like that, but also having the favor of the people in the room, depending, who's in authority, may not look like you.
Right.
And so it's almost, in some ways, like when your grandma and them was praying for you, and they was talking to God, it was like they were speaking to whatever was perceived to be the good in the other person. Because you could argue that it's somewhere out in the ether, but the people still got to make choices about you.
Right. Right.
And so, like, you could argue in some ways that prayer is a call to some form of internality, right, that we may acknowledge or not, and having the capacity to catch the attention of those energies, regardless of where you find yourself.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of a binding, right, because I think part of this kind of post-Christian notion is also like a post-standard, and not to say the standards don't exist, but it's also about, like you said, whose faith or whose truth and why bind. And we were having this conversation the other day, and I know, being in church in this Divinity space, folks may fight me later, but it almost seems like in some ways where the sin used to be having more than one God, the sin becomes only having one. Because in that sense, you're not true to yourself, and it becomes very easy for you to narrow down your focus and be completely unaware of the things around you in a way that allows you to take seriously all that you're in relationship with.
Yeah. Yeah. So then, to what degree?
Friends, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It is break time.
Is it? I thought we had time.
It's 3 o'clock.
This is a good conversation. Lose
So-
track of time.
Let's take about a 10-minute break,
Okay.
and then we will come back and see where it flows in terms of Q&A that might be incorporated in some further comments or questions that Dr. Green still has. So let's take about 10 minutes, be back at 3:10, and we will continue this conversation.
Okay. I'm gonna come back. And then I'll open it up for Q&A after. Okay. Cause we ain't gonna just cut that off.
Yeah, love that.
Am I close enough in, or do you want me to? Do we
want
need to
us to-
squeeze at all?
Okay. Just tell me where you. My phone away. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we get a copy? Thanks. You might need anything to drink?
No, I'm okay.
I got a really
One more question. And then we'll lead into. I'll open this.
Hello. Yes. Yes, I remember your face. It's good to see you again. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. I did. I went on. That's you have a really good memory. I was at my grandfather's church that he pastored for 50 something years. So yes, I'm around. Yeah, how are you? And do you attend this church? Okay, I thought so.
I'm not doing a hot mic situation, but I am going to put the mic a little closer to you when we do start again. So move away from me.
Yes, that's right. Well, I was very blessed by that scholarship, so it's good to see you again. Keep praying for me. No, I'm a hospice chaplain by day, but I'm actually going to take an intern pastor this summer. And after that, I don't know, maybe some more church work. I hope so. I love church work. But you're working with people that are kind of outside. Yes, most of the time. And the millennials that I work with, they're definitely outside the church, but they're in my house. And so we form our own little, churches, services. So, yeah, it's all good work. Yeah.
I know Valerie Horseman. She's just so impressed with her.
Oh, I miss her. Do you still communicate with her? I haven't seen her on social media, but yeah, I miss her a lot. I was impressed with her too. But I like to come and visit the church here and just hang out more. You too.
Thank you. I see you on all kinds of social media.
Well, it's good to be with you. Judy Stemple, where are you from?
Right here.
Fort Worth, Texas.
Texas. I grew up in this.
It's a beautiful place.
Well, both of you are from here.
That's right. Beautiful place.
Where does your community meet?
In my house.
At your house.
Yes, we gotta work on getting up out of there.
Picked up your phone and dropped it.
Sorry. No, it's
Trying to get them out of you. Well,
no, it's wrong.
I know you work with William-Hartgrove.
yes.
Yeah, y'all are friends.
I'm leaving here early in the morning to go walk with them. We're walking across North Carolina this week.
I went to a started celebrating children.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you come down to El Paso when we were there? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll never forget. We walked to the center where they were holding the children and said we wanted a pastoral visit and they wouldn't let us in. So we all just went around and talked into the speaker, hoping that somebody on the other end heard. And Bishop Pearson was so proud of him. But he walked up to the box and he pushed the button and he said, I just want to say I love you.
I hate I didn't get to meet him. I really do.
And it was the next
Hello,
week
hello.
that shooting happened.
Hello.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yep. Good to be with you.
And bless you.
All just trying to get warm.
Oh, yeah. I'll see you this evening.
I'm good. I'm going over to,
Because this is running a little bit longer, so if you have to leave.
I need to leave here by 3:40. Probably. Let me check this text, because the person who's picking me up says,
It's required. So we probably need a good 2 hours.
she's picking me up between 4 and 4:15 from the hotel. So
Okay.
I can walk over there in 15 minutes.
Okay, I will control her tight to end this by 3:40, 3:45 at the latest. So you can have enough time to do what you need to do. And I'm also happy to give you a ride to the hotel, just to make sure, you can't miss your flight. I want you to get home, so make sure that happens.
Thank you.
So we'll start up in another 3 minutes or so.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask one more question.
And I'm gonna interrupt at 3:30, so you can come before the Q&A.
It'll be quick. Yeah, we'll be quick. He got to talk again later, so you still
Right.
working.
And yeah, let me sit back.
No, you're good.
Let me sit back a little bit and make sure I'm. Okay. Put it a little closer to me. Try to project. Yes.
I'm gonna leave it open-ended how you might connect your definition to the theme. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, friends.
Biography of Harriet Tubman.
Hope you had a good break.
I was thinking about it when you were talking about the
Welcome you back. We want to welcome you back. Go ahead and wrap up that last sentence in your conversation. We are going to welcome this panel back. And we are going to have some Q&A soon after. So I will hand the mic over to Dr. Gary Green.
Okay. So we got cut off a little bit, and so I do have a few more questions for Dr. Butler, but I'm just going to ask one of those, and then we will transition into Q&A for anybody who wants to engage the panel or raise anything. But Philip, you and I, we've got an athletic connection. We've talked about, and in your previous work, and then also in my work, the way that I understand spirituality is something that we embody. Perhaps even separate from the way we articulate the religion that names it. I'm curious how you are defining spirituality in a similar way or maybe even differently. And then how does that for you connect to this theme of this conversation that we're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So I've had at least 3 iterations in my definition of spirituality. At one point, or at least the earliest one was I think that which connects you to that which is like beyond yourself.
Yeah.
So like, something maybe higher or the universe, whatever your thing is. But from there, I had a sense that it was more so like your ethic or your code, like the things that you do. Because it's one thing to say you believe something, and something else for you to, live your life. And so for me, my second iteration was spirituality is your unwritten or unspoken code that you live. But I think it's current iteration. I won't say last. It's current iteration, right? Yeah, who knows? It's the way that you weave together every facet of your life into a coherent thread.
Yeah.
And so, and the idea is that if you take everything, every facet of your life, like the things that whether it be brushing your teeth all the way to, the most, meditative practice you might engage in, the idea is that through this particular ethic, you are trying to make it make sense. Like if the way that you meditate doesn't align with the way that you do something else, or the way that you say that you understand. So you could argue it's closing the gap between what you say and what you believe.
Yeah.
But in a real sense, like given the way that life weaves and overlaps and is very much so kind of this intertwined thing, spirituality is the way that you weave those various aspects. And so we're talking about, you know, incarnating love, right? Then you would, if love is your ethic, then you would find ways to weave it in.
Yeah.
And you would find ways to make the way that you understand love align throughout, you know, the various iterations or aspects of your life.
And it seems to me that in just thinking about this in terms of post-Christianity or just even the conversation about this is that it would be pretty evident. Like if love is your ethic and this is some way that you weave your life together, it's also going to show up in the way you embody your life.
Maybe though, because I think one of the things I thought was interesting was like when you say it's evident, but like under whose understanding of love, like and
that's fair.
And I think, and I'm not saying this just to be like flip or clip, but the idea is that like I don't think that my neighbor is the first person that gets my love.
Right.
Like you might be the last person.
Right.
And the first person is gonna be myself. Because if I can't extend it to myself, if I can't get to know myself, if I can't get to come back home, then I'm always going to be like fighting in some way, or giving in to my neighbor in some way that is not an extension of how I understand myself, and so I would then be out of alignment.
Yeah.
With who I understand myself to be, who I think I'm becoming, or giving myself the room, right? To talk about possibilities earlier, and so at the very least, if we're not understanding that compassion stays at home first, like, because then you would be asking me, and this is why like I have various issues with notions of morality and nonviolence, all this other joke, because I'm not finna like this is one of my critiques of Cohen. I'm not finna keep laying my life down for everybody else. That don't make no sense. Like it's willful suicide at this point, and I'm good on that.
Yeah.
And so like, cool. If I'm not like saying that everybody shouldn't do it, but there's certain spaces you won't find me because I do not find them not only generative, but I don't think they're productive in the same ways that I'm looking to be productive. And so we can all have a goal, but the ways in which we attack it should look different. Yeah. Or else they'll be easily calculated.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I didn't intend to quote Jesus or the Bible in this, but I can specifically remember the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about the compassion and the love that we need to have for ourselves, for me, it connects with that admonition.
But I think that the last part has gotten chopped off.
Absolutely.
To such
Absolutely.
Extent blunted, right? And that's what we talked about. Like if you only have one deity, right? Having one deity that you agreed upon suggests that you have stunted and blunted and butchered God to the point where you actually don't know the intricacies, right? The extensions. Yeah. The other places this guy fits because you now have cut off the limbs or whatever things that would allow for God to be seen as an extension of God's self.
Yeah. Oof, that's good. We could obviously talk all day about these things, but I do want to pause and just open up the floor for Q&A. And so we've got, I think, Tommy, you said we've got, about 15, 20 minutes or so? And so any questions that anybody has, just please raise your hand, and Tommy will bring you the mic, and we can keep this conversation going.
Got one over there.
Can you hear me? I might have two actually that are unrelated, but the first one takes just a bit. I'm Rebecca Stevenson. I'm one of the trustees here at Brite. So the first question relates to what opportunities we may have by naming this post-Christian moment accurately and describing it accurately. And so the backdrop is this morning a guy named Leighton Woodhouse was writing in the New York Times a guest column in which he was quoting Mark Carney from Davos saying that, what we have entered into is a world order in which the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Which would have been a familiar idea to Vikings and the various players in the Peloponnesian Wars, but it is something that we've only been able to do in the Christian context with a great deal of mental gymnastics of justification by either, declaring someone else to be not human,
Right.
declaring a certain other country to be evil,
Yeah.
or to say that, something's an existential threat to us in some way.
Right.
So and you sort of addressed this to some degree in your remarks, but what are the opportunities that we have by correctly naming this? Also, because we've been co-opted, do we need a new brand for Christianity so that we can articulate who is in the idea that we're not going that way, down that path? And then the unrelated question is what are the hazards of pushing deeply into post-humanism when we have perhaps an existential threat to humanity, as I was bringing up yesterday, in the form of artificial intelligence? So it's a completely off-the-wall different question.
And is that for anybody on the panel? I'm gonna say yeah. Anybody? Okay.
I heard like 3 or 4 questions. It's just 2. Okay. Well, I think if I hear your first questions, what I think Christianity has an opportunity to do in a post-Christian, because also you think post-Christian, like Christians aren't going away, but if Christians aren't going away, but we're in a post-Christian, what we're talking about is a post-Christian hegemony, right? And so
Yeah.
at the very least, Christians have the opportunity to accept the fact that they're one among many.
Yeah.
And what does it mean for Christians to be a part of a global village that is no more important than anybody else, right? I think that's one option. But in terms of this kind of what's the problem with leaning into this post-humanist thing, right? So, within post-humanism, you have like a transhumanist post-human that takes, technological advancement to its, fullest end, in the sense that, right, this particular transhumanist post-human who may be, sitting or leaning on this table here, is so far advanced that their ability to relate to us is no longer, possible, right? They're so strong that they have no sense of touch in the same way, or they may have no way to relate to our notion of pain or sadness, things along that nature. But then you have these kind of post-humans that, they've attempted to, through the way they live their life, through the way they ritualize and are with nature or with others, right? They've attempted to reestablish the social order based upon the game that they understand the world to be. If we talk about artificial intelligence as part of this like existential threat piece, I think there's a couple of ways to address this. The first one is, again, like this one, where Western or Eurocentric posthumanism attempts to address issues without actually solving what's in front of them. Like, we have this existential threat to humanity. So when Black posthumanism, humanity is different from people in the sense that a human is a general construct, even if it is tied to empire and proximities of power. But this universal construct of the human is obviously, in this sense, something that everybody has to conform to, right? This is a contortion, or this is the lopping off of who you are to fit into this thing. But we juxtapose this with people, and then you could argue semantics or not, a person versus a human. People in this sense are local and complex. They have ancestors, they have traditions, they are connected to the land. And so this is a much different kind of understanding of what a person is as a particular entity. And so AI would not then trump people in this sense. And so like, similar to what Black women have said, like, we're not finna get into this particular fight and let everybody else deal with ICE and this administration. If some folks want to fight AI on this realm, that's on them, because we still have other things to work out over here. And I say this because, like, for instance, at ILIF, we've built tools and we're building different models and we're building different social networks that are meant to address, like, the social, not just inequities, but just the social instabilities that we have today and the internal instabilities that we have that would take into account the very serious nature of the ways in which we have been with each other and are attempting to be with each other by opening up different portals through these kind of spiritual technologies. But all of that is to suggest on a basic level that I also make this claim that if artificial intelligence was spearheaded by other communities than the one that was currently present, we would be in different environmental situations altogether. You would not have data centers that are constructed the way they are. You would not have pools on certain ecological economies at the same rate. you would have different kind of structures set up, and you could argue folks who would go the route of like, well, look at certain countries that are corrupt and they are, on the continent they're not, right? These are folks who are still working through and are very much so trying to pull away from their colonial straits and are still working out who they are in the midst of this global theater. And so we have a lot of things to consider about the ways in which artificial intelligence, personhood, humans, and what we see is coming over the horizon have a relationship and what it means for them to parse these things out and fight for survival regardless of what that looks like.
I like how you're talking about personhood. I find that compelling, even from within my own tradition. But I just wanted to add, I took what Carney was saying about the kind of might makes right vision of the strong powers to be in his political economy context that he was addressing a kind of invitation to new kinds of coalitions among sort of mid-size powers. And I think, to the extent that that is true, and there certainly are political players who see the world that way, the most well-known articulation of it in our context, I think, is Stephen Miller. But, these ideas exist in other places too. I think for, churches that acknowledge that same reality and this kind of post-Christendom or post sort of Christian society reality that we're talking about, it's also an invitation to different kinds of coalitions. So much of what I was talking about earlier in terms of like moral movements, I think are a way for churches to engage with the unions in their community that share, a concern for people earning enough from their work that they can take care of their families, with tenants unions, right, that are dealing with the housing crisis in this country, and with folks that have some of these concerns that you mentioned. The way that AI very practically is leading to data centers that are using up the water and other misuses and abuses of land. The only other thing I wanted to note is that I think something we have to pay attention to in our moment, in terms of what we've talked about, is that the sort of techno-feudalist version of this might makes right, the kind of Peter Thiel vision of the world, is very committed to framing itself within the language of this religious nationalism that we've talked about. So, it is no accident that he's giving exclusive lectures on the Antichrist on the West Coast to people who pay ungodly amounts of money to listen to him. And I think that is very much in keeping with this tradition that we've talked about of using a religious narrative to justify the use and abuse of people, places, and resources.
Good afternoon. I've been following the conversation and got a little concerned because we really need to put this conversation in context, that this is Western Europe, United States-centric conversation. And while we may affect what's going on globally, and sometimes a lot, some of the problems and the issues that we are expressing with regards to post-Christianity are very United States issues at this point. So we cannot say that globally we are in a post-Christianity environment. On the contrary, the numbers show that Christianity is growing really fast in Asia, Africa, and the South and the Western of the United States. That Gen Z are going back to church in droves, but not to your traditional evangelical churches. Of all surprises, they're going back to the Catholic Church. There's something about the liturgy and the religion aspects of it that is attractive. And they have remained unapologetically Christian. And that I can appreciate. Last night we were singing here, "Don't Dream Is Over." We cannot allow our churches to dream that is over. and our society to dream that there is no post-Christianity the same way that there was never a post-colonization period. We're still having colonies all over the world. And we are in the decolonization period at this point. So I'm concerned about the language, the context, and I agree in the terms of social, political, and socio-economical, and the impact that that's having to the church is very important. I didn't mean to lecture, and I'm very sorry, but I'm very concerned about the context, and that we need to put this conversation in this context, that if we want to turn this wave in the United States, we have something to do with it, and we could do it. I work for the pharmaceutical medical device industry, so I deal day in, day out with artificial intelligence. And that does not scare me as much as the people who love to dehumanize people. That scares me pretty much. So if anything, we should be advocating for the ethical use of artificial intelligence and to put boundaries in what the artificial intelligence could do and the way, as you were saying before, we define what a human is. We need as a church to move towards that. I was in Chicago when the Pope called for the National Convention of Catholic Youth. The Lucas Oil Center was full with Catholics, kids, spreading the gospel. I was at the hotel, and 5 youth, Catholic youth, said, "I love you. We love you. Can we pray for you?" And for the first time, I have 5 Catholic kids doing what none in my whole existing of 68 years has any kid in the Pentecostal, Evangelical, or Disciples of Christ done for me. Stop me in the middle of a hotel and pray for me. And they asked me, what can we do and pray for you? So I have hope. The dream is not over. I have hope, and I have hope in being authentic Christians, because those youth are not going to come back to the same. If they left, they're not going to come back to the same. Mm-hmm. They want to come back to authenticity, and they want to come back to the Christianity that is not diluted, because at the end of the day, this ends up in a cross, but it still has a resurrection.
Thank you for that. And if I may, maybe a helpful distinction, and maybe something that we could have even framed this differently. I think, Jonathan, I heard you say post-Christendom. And Philip, when you were talking about kind of a way to think about the post-Christianity we're talking about is also a way to talk about post-Christian hegemony. And I think that when we think about post-Christianity in this context, one of the things that we're talking about also is understanding, like you said, Philip, how Christianity is one among many. This kind of detraction or this removal of this idea or this notion that it's Christian or nobody, I think needs to die. And I think part of this conversation, and to whatever degree that Christianity as this imposing state religion that can kind of flex on everybody else, whether that is in the United States or elsewhere, I think that's what I hear, the kind of crumbling, yeah, go ahead.
But I think more to the point, like if we look around in our seminaries, folks are not here anymore, like in the same way they used to be. And so even if Christianity is on the rise in different ways, it is a type of Christianity that is not one that engages intellectual, critical thought in the same way. And so what does that mean? And so I'd rather you not stop me in the hall and ask to pray for me. And so like this is just, it's preference. And I think what she's saying is important. Yeah. But I think also what we're talking about is we're addressing the reality of the future of not only theological education, but higher education in a very real way. Folks are not coming. And if they're not coming here to at the very least engage some of these forms of thinking, then who is crafting their spiritual formation? Mm. And if we're, I think that's the real problem that we're getting at is, and so yeah, post-Christian hegemony in the middle of an extension of a fascist kind of regime that seems to be taking, like now I think maybe we're having the real conversation because post-Christianity in this sense, again, suggests that people are unwilling to align themselves with a certain thing, but on the back end, you now have folks who can't read, who don't like to write, who want to lean on certain forms of technology and are willing to let other people tell them what's right and what to do. And so now we're wrestling with a different kind of tension here.
Yeah.
And I would add, because I appreciate that statement too, when I say post-Christian, I'm certainly not suggesting the aftermath of Christian existence globally. I wouldn't ever want to suggest that. What I'm talking about is people, especially in my immediate orbit, who were raised and indoctrinated in a particular tradition, and they are something completely other now. The tension in that, the lament in that, the confusion in that, and all of those things that those are what I want to talk through and challenge us to think about, but certainly not to detach ourselves from reality that people still do love and believe in Jesus all over the world, as I do.
Got about 5 more minutes for any further questions and responses from any of the panelists.
You got somebody coming to you, but while you're going, I'll just add that I think a basic question that people are going to have to figure out when power gets redistributed and renegotiated is, where does the authority lie?
Right.
Right. And I think that's something that we have to learn to articulate in different ways when there are major changes of what people hold in common.
Absolutely.
Hi, Mike from LA. I serve a UCC church right now, although I'm born and raised disciple. And next Sunday is Science and Faith and Technology Sunday. And my sermon is going to be lifting up all the innovative, incredible things that scientists and technicians have been able to do, and then challenge the church with why can't we put the same amount of energy and passion and innovation into what we do, because the truth is, whether we want to admit it or not, in America, 40 million Christians have left the church over the last 25 years. And that's just a fact.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. Curious to know how you all would innovate at a level that is, we've got robotics now that are you're people that were born without arms, they're hooking up arms, and they can think and their hands can pinch. I mean, we can, autonomous cars, robots that are going to become nannies. All these different things are because people are passionately throwing themselves in with all their energy and creativity into things that they think are meaningful. What can the church do likewise?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I say that mainly because, like I know the work that we're doing at ILIF, and I think about how similar, same, about 100 years ago, for instance, in black churches, right, you have some of your key doctors, lawyers, and figures that'll come out of the church but not go back, right, because of, whether or not they were accepted. And so you, in terms of like, and I imagine this is not, if you have folks who leave and get a certain amount of education, and sometimes when they come home, they're like, you think you know everything. And so they don't go back. But what I think was important or foundational in those times, in the turn of the last century up to the 40s and 50s, is that they created space where folks were able to innovate. Like they held space for folks to do their homework, to imagine together, to excel scholastically. Because I think in some ways there's an organic bubbling up when you give people the space to do stuff with ideas. But I mean, at the same time, then you could think about, what it means to host like hackathons and camps and things of that nature. I'm very much so against like using technology to make ministry better. because I don't know if that makes people's lives better. I think secularism is important for the sake of taking what you believe and then embedding it within the society, right? And so what happens then if you take this makes me uneasy. At the very least, what happens if you imagine a different world that looks like the equitable, like for instance, somebody asked, what do we do with AI? And one of the things I said a couple of years ago is you have to bias towards the world you want, because artificial intelligence is already weighted. It's already programmed to give certain answers. So what happens when you program it to give the answers that lead to the world that you say you want? And so if churches say they want a world where people get, food, for example, or there's housing for everybody, how do you craft the algorithm to make that the case, as opposed to how do you make people's lives just kind of the recipients of things? How do you proactively create this future through the technologies that the church thinks about or offers room for kids to imagine and do world building together?
I want to say, because I like what you're saying about your suspicion that the church, can sort of use technology to innovate. But the question of innovation, that's what I took you to be saying. This notion that, if we can just get on Instagram, right?
I was just laughing at the question. That's all.
Okay. But the innovation question, I just wanted to raise one specific example I've seen, because I think the challenge of innovation can be, right, for the church to see a particular issue that the community is facing and ask, what resources do we have? And I've been struck by the churches in Minneapolis just over the last few weeks, just recognizing that they are communities of people that get together to sing. And they've started something called the Singing Resistance. And they gather people in sanctuaries, partly because it's cold outside, right? So it's nice to have an inside space to practice. But places that are used to gathering people to sing have been gathering people to learn new songs that they then go out in the streets and sing. I think that's a sort of social innovation that just happened on the fly that is rooted in, a tradition, but that strikes me as the kind of, the kind of innovation that a church can do in their context.
I think maybe at another foundational level is churches can work to become perhaps looser with its own doctrines that might assume that there is a kind of binary between what churches are doing and what scientists are doing. So I think you're an example, bringing this to the pulpit and talking about what these advances are, or the ways that people's lives perhaps are being enhanced, or what kind of discoveries are happening in the sciences. And then the way that we have this kind of knee-jerk way of thinking about that as over there, and so then what can the church do similarly or otherwise? I think it's more with. I think it's and this kind of gets even back to how are we thinking about our doctrines? How are we thinking about our own interpretations of who we are in relation to? Why do we think of science and spirituality separately? So I think there's some really foundational questions that would open up a posture where it isn't so much. I think the sacred secular split is BS. First of all, I think there's far more fluidity and far more overlap in terms of the way that we think about spirituality and science, in terms of how they relate to our embodied existence as people. And so I think one of the starting places perhaps is for churches to become maybe flexible about those definite faith claims that have sometimes a restrictive function in terms of the sciences that we will engage, or the ways that we'll acknowledge the sacrality of things that traditionally we have not thought of as sacred but secular. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.
I love that question, and I like the idea of social innovation especially. There was a song I grew up singing, I think it's by Ernest Pugh, "Increase My Capacity for You." It was a song we sang to God. And I think the idea of increasing capacity for God is just you being on the hunt for God's divinity. And if you hunt for it, you'll find it. Jonathan asked me at the beginning of this, what's your favorite way to preach? Nobody's ever asked me that before, but the answer is film. Yeah. And second in line is stand-up comedy. And by doing those things, I'm just really doing what I love. And when we find out what our people love, we can then do those. And now we have social innovation, and we've increased our capacity
Yeah.
for enjoying and appreciating divinity and theology and all of those things in this church context.
And I think that takes more seriously the expansiveness of the God that we claim to be in relationship with. That God is not boxed into any particular tradition or church, but that if we assume that we will find God in spaces that are all over throughout our existence, then we will.
Yeah, science, anything.
Absolutely.
Friends, please join me in giving a hand to the Communion Behind the Curtain panel. Thank y'all so much. Well done. There's this worship service installation thing happening at 7 p.m. that we would love to see you all at in the sanctuary. And for those who are also invited to the reception at 5 p.m., please look at your invitations and join in that capacity. Otherwise, everyone, we would love to see you at 7 p.m. in the sanctuary. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your break time.
Thank you for graciously shepherding us.
We would end up somewhere.